Part 43. Looking for the Lost Ship Girl. Author, Hai De Rong Yan. Chapter 422. Speeding cars roared by on the road, kicking up dust. The cicadas chirping in the treetops are incessant, which is essential music every summer. We walked from the bar to Downing Street in Jaska. It took a long time to reach the convenience store where South Dakota worked. Along the way, Washington talked about the embarrassing things in South Dakota, such as being asked to quit after working for only a short time, pouring a lot of mustard on Japanese food, and seeing sashimi said to be raw and inedible. It's just ahead. Seeing the sign of the convenience store in the distance, Washington's worry was not that she needed to cross the road. The sun was blazing right now, and an obvious heat wave could be seen on the road, mainly because she still had some unfinished ideas. Crossing the street and arriving in front of the convenience store, Washington stopped a few people before anyone could go in. "You guys wait here, I'll have a few words with South Dakota Fatty first," Akaga said. "Why?" However, Washington had already walked into the convenience store and failed to answer Akaga's question. Akaga stood under the shade and said, "I want to drink a soda." "So, Akaga, you must be too good to eat, even though you are very cute when you act coquettishly. This is a nice convenience store with glass and rolling shutters." Sugu looked through the glass and the goods on the shelves and saw Washington talking to a girl who was slightly shorter than her in the convenience store. The clerk wearing a blue and white striped uniform is quite distinctive. If he were just outside, he would probably not know who he was, but he would still pay attention to him. If you know in advance that it is your ship girl, you can definitely guess who the other party is. It will never happen like when I met San Juan on a passenger ship. I saw a girl with pink hair but couldn't figure out who it was. Thick, seaweed-like, slightly curly silver hair, wheat-colored skin, and a fleshy figure. That must be South Dakota, definitely not North Carolina or so and so. Such a figure and appearance are so distinctive that it is impossible not to recognize him. In his sight, Washington was talking to South Dakota, and he didn't know what they were talking about now. South Dakota clenched her hands into fists and stood on tiptoes, trying to make herself taller. However, even so, her head reached at most the tip of Washington's nose, and she was still a little short. With his hands clenched into fists and standing on tiptoes, South Dakota looked as if he was angry with Washington. "They always get into a fight when they meet," Guam said. Sugu said, "What is the relationship between Washington and South Dakota? Friends, enemies, or what?" Historically speaking, the Washington and the South Dakota should have enough conflicts. The South Dakota was beaten by the Kirishima due to a power failure, and then the Washington sank the Kirishima. Afterwards, the South Dakota said that Washington was taking credit. After a series of events, the sailors on the two ships had deep grudges and even fought. Ship girls are born from memory and history. To the sailors on the two ships, the other side is probably more annoying than the enemy, but because they are companions. As a ship girl born from memory and history, it goes without saying that the two of them would not have a good look when meeting each other. However, now that she is a ship girl, she is not too limited to the past. Sugu heard that the two were happy enemies and always helped each other. Well, in fact, it was only Washington's unilateral help. For Washington, it's probably like that, "You look at me and I don't like it. But the best thing I see is the way you hate me but have to accept my help." Richelieu hesitated and said, "They seem to be quarreling." A quarrel, or Washington's unilateral teasing of the South Dakota, can be seen by anyone with a discerning eye. On the other side, the Admiral was back and could tease South Dakota again. The two happiness combined put Washington in a good mood. Inside the convenience store, Washington reached out and touched South Dakota's head and ruffled South Dakota's hair. "See you again," excluding the first 200 pounds, little fat South Dakota. As a lawyer, Washington's ability to speak is not bad. As she spoke, She looked South Dakota up and down, directly hitting South Dakota's sore spot. South Dakota looks fatter than everyone else. Well, actually, her figure is similar to that of Bayside and Blucher, they both have a fleshy figure. However, compared to the two of them, South Dakota is shorter and looks fatter because of his short stature. Bayside has always been fine with being called fat. But South Dakota is particularly sensitive to this matter. Once she is called fat, she will definitely refute it. The more she refutes, the more Washington likes to talk about her. "You're the fat one." South Dakota wanted to retort, and she looked at Washington. However, Washington is tall and has a plump bust and waist, so there is no fault at all. Every time he quarrels, he suffers a loss. If he quarrels verbally, he is simply not as good as Washington. If it were to take action, the two of them would have nothing to do with it, and it would be impossible for them to actually do it. Two people really opened fire and were going to destroy more than half the block. Even if you are angry, you won't really do anything. The more power you have, the greater the restraint you have on yourself. South Dakota lowered his head, thinking, "Not angry, not angry." Washington added, 3 jobs in 1 month. South Dakota has indeed changed a lot of jobs, and all of them were forced to quit. Although personally I don't think it matters, there is a place for me to stay here if I don't want to. But now that Washington said it, South Dakota still felt a little embarrassed. Anyway, her whole body was already trembling. Furious, South Dakota decided to ignore the person, but Washington would not give up. She continued, "A man sneaked into the admiral's office and took the ring away, and then said everywhere that the admiral gave him the ring. SHHH, I think for some people, it may not even fit the ring on their finger." This sentence made South Dakota completely angry. She exposed her hand, and the ring was on the ring finger of her left hand. She said loudly, "Where can't it fit in? Take a look," and the admiral did not refuse the ring. "Then you agreed." "How do you know he didn't give me the ring? He originally promised me, gave me the ring, and then suddenly disappeared." Washington shook her head firmly, waved her hand and said, "No, no, no, I have never heard this statement before, you are talking nonsense." South Dakota wanted to argue, but something suddenly occurred to her. She narrowed her eyes and said proudly, "What is that called, presumption of innocence or something? If you have no evidence that what I said is a lie, then what I said is the truth. It's you are questioning me, so you have to provide evidence to refute it, and you are a lawyer, a parallel importer." Washington stretched out his hand and put it on South Dakota's head. South Dakota slapped Washington's hand away in anger. Washington continued to stretch out his hand, and South Dakota continued to slap it away, and then said loudly, "You're crazy, Washington." Washington leaned into South Dakota's ear and said, "I have evidence that what you are telling is a lie." "What evidence?" South Dakota felt a little guilty, but not worried. When his admiral left, he left almost nothing behind, except for some memories. Anyway, it's strange, not even a set of clothes is left behind, it seems like he disappeared suddenly. The ring is something left behind, but it doesn't really count. Those things that truly represent memories, such as smelly clothes, handwriting, and photos, are all missing. If there was, haha, it would have been taken away by me long ago. South Dakota said loudly, "Tell me, what evidence do you have? If you can't tell me, just leave on your own." Washington reached out and patted Nanda's face and said, "Of course I have evidence, my little fat man, look at the door." South Dakota looked outside in confusion, and then saw the person waving to him. That person had a particularly familiar appearance. Looking for the Lost Ship Girl. Author, Hai-De-Rong Yan. Chapter 423. There was a small table under the canopy outside the convenience store. South Dakota sat at the table obediently, and directly opposite her was Sugu. There were many people around, such as Akagi holding a big bag of potato chips, and Guam and Washington smiling happily. Richelieu didn't show any special behavior. She just looked at the job advertisement posted on the convenience store glass. However, she was the only one who knew about it, and she didn't really pay attention to the advertisement. Oh, fat South Dakota, this is the proof, this is the proof. In front of outsiders, he is a beautiful and handsome female lawyer, but in front of South Dakota, Washington likes to do the most mocking things. You must admit your mistakes when you are wrong, and you must stand upright when you are beaten. Guam is happy to see anyone having fun. Washington added, you took away a few rings. Tell the truth. You will be lenient if you confess, but strict if you resist. Akagakakakaka, eating potato chips, thinking, if you confess, you will be lenient, if you go to jail, if you resist, you will be strict, and you can go home for the new year. Washington and Guam kept chatting beside them, and South Dakota banged the table angrily and shouted, go away, it's so annoying. South Dakota was furious, and Washington and Guam could only walk a little further, but they were still whispering there. Finally, they were driven away. Although they only walked a little further away, they were still watching from the side. South Dakota felt a little better. Then, as the real owner of this matter and the victim in the ring incident, his own Admiral Sugu was sitting opposite. South Dakota raised his head and glanced at Sugu. His appearance was slightly different from the one in his memory, but his facial features were still the same as before. After looking at it like this, she lowered her head. South Dakota sat on the seat, arms crossed. It's obviously a hot day, with cicadas chirping and heat waves, and the ice cream shop in the distance is full of customers and has to queue up, but South Dakota now looks like it's shivering in the cold wind. Admiral. Admiral. At the same time, Sugu also looked at South Dakota. South Dakota was wearing a striped store clerk uniform. He had a muscular figure and could not be called fat. Although he was a bit short, he fit Sugu's aesthetics. The other party did not look like a slut as he imagined. Even in the past, when they first met, the gentle Lexington fell on him, but South Dakota, who he thought was the most enthusiastic, did not fall on him as he imagined. Although everyone said they should worry about the little fatty South Dakota, it looks like there is no need to worry at all. Sugu looked at South Dakota, who was squirming and uneasy. Her left hand with the ring was now placed behind her back to prevent others from seeing it. Because she works in a convenience store, she is not wearing the most suitable sandals for the season. She only has round toe shoes that tapping uneasily on the ground. After South Dakota called him Admiral twice, he didn't continue talking. Sugu thought for a moment and said, South Dakota. Yes. South Dakota lowered his head and responded uneasily. South Dakota. Sugu shouted again. The two of them haven't spoken yet. Next to them, Washington already seemed a little impatient. There was no excitement to watch. She stood in front of the convenience store with her arms folded across her chest. If she put on a cloak, she would definitely look like a human hero. After all, she could already see the little girl passing by looking at Washington with stars in her eyes. Washington is so handsome. If I really want to compare him now, probably only Richelieu in night costume can compare. However, now Richelieu has softened a lot, and gradually began to wear dresses and white sandals, looking like a girl. Ignoring the crowd of onlookers in the distance, this is a world of two people. Seeing South Dakota's shy look, Sugu smiled, but even this smile made South Dakota feel more and more uneasy. She got the ring and even liked to show it off in front of the destroyer. I have fantasized more than once that my admiral and her husband are away on a journey, and I am the little wife who stays at home, and maybe one day she will become a husband-looking stone. Occasionally, I also fantasize about whether I am a widow, but my admiral and husband just disappeared, so it definitely does not count. South Dakota can show off in front of outsiders, but now that the rightful owner is in front of her, she doesn't have the confidence to do so anyway, so she still wants to lose face. All in all, South Dakota's face is blushing now, but because of his wheat-colored skin, just like Guan Yu doesn't have to worry about blushing, it's actually not very noticeable when South Dakota blushes. Sugu said, "Why did South Dakota come here?" South Dakota was distracted, so she just responded. Sugu added, "I heard that you have conflicts with Washington, why are you with her?" South Dakota still didn't speak, and Sugu felt helpless. Sugu was silent for a moment, thinking about how to stir up the topic. Opposite him, South Dakota seemed to suddenly summon up the courage, clenched his hands into fists and hit his thighs. South Dakota said, Admiral, I'm sorry." Sugu was a little stunned. He didn't know why South Dakota wanted to say sorry. South Dakota continued, "The ring thing, they instigated me to get it." Although he knew that no one would believe it, South Dakota still forced himself to explain, otherwise he would have to find a crack in the ground to get in. "The ring, that one. The Admiral didn't leave anything behind. I thought, at least I should take something as a souvenir. So I just went to get it, otherwise, let those little destroyer girls take it away. If I get it, it will be difficult to deal with it in the future, and I won't be able to find it. So I thought, I'll take it and keep it well." Even if the preface does not match the follow-up, even if it is a lie, if it were Washington, he would probably be able to tell the truth clearly, and no one would be able to detect it if it is true and false. However, South Dakota has no talent in this area, and her lies are full of loopholes. Normally, many people would hate lies, but now Sugu couldn't express his disgust. Suguhen could understand such a lie. It would be really embarrassing if someone had the courage to admit it. South Dakota said, "Lexington is a wedding ship, Saratoga is a wedding ship, everyone is a wedding ship. Washington always laughs at me. She says I will never get married if I am so fat and dark. I think, if I wear the ring, no one will laugh at me." South Dakota glanced at Sugu, tears already appearing in his eyes. She reached out and touched the ring on her finger, turning it around in circles. She could obviously pull it off in one go, but it took a lot of effort to pull it off just a millimeter away. She said it while pulling it off, with a cry in her voice. If the Admiral comes back, he must return the ring to the Admiral. South Dakota is not such a shameless person. 9 out of 10 orange cats are fat, and South Dakota's voice really feels like a fat orange cat making an aggrieved sound when it wants to eat cat food. Washington's voice came from a distance. They were already very far away, but now they were getting closer and closer, and it seemed that they could hear two people talking. Seeing South Dakota's appearance, she felt secretly happy and said, "If you take off the ring, take it off quickly. Don't tell me that you need to use soap to take it off, or that you don't want to give the ring back at all." South Dakota no longer cared about them getting closer and closer. She was not in the mood, so she just argued loudly and said, "No." Aggrieved voice, aggrieved expression, aggrieved movements. If it were in anime now, South Dakota's mouth would have to be drawn with wavy lines. "Admiral, wait a moment, South Dakota, South Dakota." Sugu looked at South Dakota. To be honest, the little black skin was still very cute. Although not as slender as San Juan or Leipzig, South Dakota has a plump figure. But only young people like an overly slender figure. For someone like Sugu, a fleshy figure is better. South Dakota is still very popular. I already liked it when I first played it in the game, even though I only liked the South Dakota big picture. Whether it's in the game or in reality, South Dakota's aggrieved appearance makes people like it so much. However, Sugu was not a pervert. It was interesting for such a lovely girl to be so charming in front of him, but it was embarrassing. Sugu saw that South Dakota spent a long time and still didn't take off the ring. He thought about it, it was just a vow ring. You can keep the ring if you want. After hearing Sugu's words, South Dakota finally stopped moving his hands, and the tears in his eyes finally stopped. Then, can I stay? Sugu thought to himself, I want to get the ring back, but you are so coy, and a ring doesn't really matter. We are not in a game now. If we want to marry anyone, we can just find a ring. For example, when I married Helena, I just bought a random ring in a jewelry store. The ring was cheap, but Helena liked it very much and wore it on her finger at all times. It's just a ring. With the conditions of the current town hall, you can buy it casually. Since South Dakota likes it, give her the ring. Sugu said, yes, you can stay. South Dakota finally put her left hand on the table. She spread her fingers and the diamonds on the ring reflected the light in the sun. South Dakota said, then, is this the ring the Admiral gave me? Yeah, that's right, it's the ring I gave you. As soon as Sugu finished speaking, Washington suddenly thought of something. She said, Admiral, wait a minute. You can give away a house, you can give away a car, but you can't give rings randomly. This is not a gift. Richelieu hesitated and said, the ring is a promise. Sugu was still a little stunned, then heard South Dakota's excited voice, and then saw South Dakota's face change, as if he was saying yes. South Dakota is suddenly excited. I like you the most, Admiral. This is the ring the Admiral gave me, the best ring. Taking a deep breath, South Dakota stretched out his hand towards Washington confidently and shouted loudly, look, look, this is the ring the Admiral gave me. This is the ring of oath. Come and take a look. To be honest, Sugu felt a little at a loss. What is this and what? He just didn't take back the ring. He didn't say he wanted to give him a wedding ring. Why are you so excited? No, no, South Dakota just said something like, is this the ring the Admiral gave me? Then he nodded, so is this considered approval? But I just gave the ring as a gift, not as a wedding ring. But if a man gives a ring to a woman, except as a wedding ring, is it possible to give it to a woman under normal circumstances? However, when it came to proposing, he did not kneel down on one knee and say I like it, please accept the ring like Helena and Akage did. No, Sugu felt a little confused. Sugu's head was in a state of confusion. South Dakota was already dancing and showing off. Washington, look, look. Guam, look, look. Richelieu, look, look, why you look so ugly. Akage, look at it. Oh, you have it too, so I won't read it. Finally, South Dakota shouted to his co-worker in the convenience store, Peyton, look at my ring. South Dakota shuttled around like a butterfly, and Sugu put one hand on his forehead without saying a word. So is this a South Dakota routine? But does South Dakota have that many tricks? South Dakota looks like an honest child. If he is not an honest child, how could he be bullied by Washington to the point of crying? But it's not right. There are so many people in the governor's mansion telling them to be careful of the South Dakota. This shows from the side that the South Dakota is indeed very powerful. Sugu fell into confusion. South Dakota should not have so many tricks, but this time he jumped into the pit by himself. My ring, la la la. South Dakota was excited and Sugu was silent. Seeing this scene, Guam slapped his forehead and thought to himself, stupid Admiral. South Dakota danced in front of Washington. Washington stretched out his hand to hold South Dakota's head and said, you little fat guy, don't talk nonsense. The Admiral just gave you a ring. South Dakota rarely had the upper hand, and she said, yes, the Admiral just gave me the ring. No, no, I'm not proposing to you by giving you a ring but not an engagement ring. I didn't say that the Admiral proposed to me, but this is a vow ring. The Admiral has no intention of making you a wedding ship at all. You are overthinking it. Besides, if you want a wedding ring, you must register it. Washington felt that her head was also confused and she couldn't explain it properly. She thought for a while, said, "No, this won't work. Give me the ring first." South Dakota's left hand was clenched into a fist and placed on his waist, with the other hand covering it, looking cautious. "What the Admiral said was given to me is mine." Washington became angry and said, "If you don't give it, then I will rob it. Richelieu will help." Richelieu nodded beside him, without the airs of the serious knight in the past. "And you, Guam. Guam, come here, hold Nanda's fat palm. Guam, I remind you, think about who is more powerful and who you want to help. I tell you, in this world, there is no double dealing or wallowing." Guam shrugged his shoulders and thought, "If you say this, who else can I help?" Akage was the wedding host, but she was the one who didn't care the most. She had already finished her potato chips, looked at the snacks in the convenience store, and tugged on Sugu's sleeve. "Tell Admiral that you don't pay attention to your words." Admiral. I want to eat this, and that." "Akage, eat, 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 you know how to eat?" Sugu looked at the chaotic scene in front of him and thought, South Dakota is getting carried away, but you are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Looking for the Lost Ship Girl. Author, Hai De Rong Yan. Chapter 424. Stop running away and come back. We won't steal your ring. South Dakota finally revealed half of her body from behind the shelf, and she said, "If you want a ring, just ask the Admiral for it yourself, although I don't know if the Admiral will give it to you," she said with a proud face. Washington looked impassive and said, "I don't want the ring." "You don't want it, why are you taking my ring?" Washington's expression suddenly became fierce and he said, "I just get annoyed when I see you giggling in front of me. I don't have any trouble." Washington sneered. South Dakota, which had always been bullied by him in the past, was now showing off its power in front of him. The sense of disparity was really unacceptable. "Since you don't have any complaints, just come out and we won't do anything to you. Then it's settled. South Dakota is just coming off the shelf." Boom. Washington reached out and pressed South Dakota's face, and then pressed South Dakota's entire body against the glass of the convenience store. With his fleshy profile and lips pressed against the glass, South Dakota looked like a funny character in a cartoon. "You actually believe it?" Because Washington pressed her head against the glass, South Dakota's voice became strange. She said angrily, "Washington, you are actually lying." Washington pressed South Dakota to the glass, and she finally let out a breath of anger and said, "Hey, you try again, you will believe whatever I say. When did you become so naive?" Seeing this scene, as a wallflower and a double dealer, Guam was acting as a peacemaker on the side, and she said, "Washington, we are all sisters. If you have anything to say it well and don't use an axe." Washington was stunned at first, and then suddenly realized, she said, "Even if the limbs are cut off, as long as there is steel, it should not take long to recover. I know a few admirals, and I am familiar with them. I can still ask them to borrow some steel." South Dakota said, "It's strange, I've never heard of a ship girl losing her arms and legs. Don't mess around. What should I do if I can't recover? If I can't recover, it's none of my business. My hand isn't broken anyway." This sentence frightened South Dakota. She quickly patted the glass and said loudly, "How can you do this? Admiral, save me, Admiral, save me. That violent woman in Washington is bullying me again." Richelieu straightened her long hair, which had become messy due to running, and said, "The Admiral is not here." South Dakota said, "So where did he go?" "I went to buy ice cream with Akage." There was a lot of mischief in the convenience store, so Sugu simply accompanied Akage to buy ice cream and cold drinks to prevent the fire at the city gate from affecting Chiu. Just like in the garrison, Bismarck often disagreed with the Prince of Wales over something, and it didn't matter which side he was on. Sugu often turned a blind eye. Now, of course, Sugu would not get involved in this matter. He was even thinking that seeing South Dakota being bullied, South Dakota's aggrieved expression was so interesting. "Well, the main reason is actually because I heard from Guam that in the past, Washington and South Dakota were always at odds with each other. But Washington never had bullying intentions, and South Dakota never really got angry, and it was often she who wanted to provoke Washington." Since Sugu was not here, South Dakota was a little discouraged and said, "Why is the Admiral like this?" Washington said, "There is nothing you can do now." "Oh, I will never give up." South Dakota wouldn't give up, but Washington eventually gave up. It wasn't because South Dakota clenched his fists, it wasn't because Richelieu and Guam were unable to pry South Dakota's fingers off, or it wasn't because he was afraid of being seen by his admiral in a scene that was too ridiculous. Mainly because this is a convenience store. I didn't notice it at first, but only now did I remember the clerk named Peyton. She probably watched the bullying incident nearby, and Washington was still very particular about his identity. Well, whether you believe it or not, Washington definitely believes it. Washington was only indignant for a moment, but now she has calmed down, and she has returned to her former cool female lawyer appearance. She looked at South Dakota rubbing her reddish cheeks beside her, and said, "There is no wedding dress, you have not registered with the Civil Affairs Bureau, and there is no proposal. At most, this is someone's self-righteousness, and it does not count as a fraudulent marriage." South Dakota didn't understand too many things, so he thought to himself, "Remember that the marriage between the admiral and the ship's wife does not need to be registered with the Civil Affairs Bureau. Forget it, don't think about it anymore, you don't need to worry about those things. She has always been easily satisfied, as long as she has a ring in her hand." She said, "It is enough to have a vow ring. My vow ring, the ring is so beautiful." Boom. Washington pressed South Dakota to the glass again. Sugu and Akage came back soon. He and Akage brought a lot of ice cream and soda. When he came back, the originally lively scene was over, and only South Dakota looked aggrieved. "Everyone, let's have some ice cream. Things are already like this, there is no more way." Washington walked to Sugu. She took an ice cream and looked at Sugu and shook her head. Sugu found that the word idiot was evident in the way Washington looked at him. "What? I'm kind enough to buy you something." Then he noticed that Richelieu was looking at him, somewhat saddened by his misfortune and angry at him. "But no matter how you think about it, you wouldn't look like that. Guam is a place where nothing happens, and she doesn't want to get involved in such a thing at all." As for Akage, she didn't care about this kind of thing at first. Her only competitor was Lexington, not even Saratoga. South Dakota rubbed her face and walked to Sugu's side. She snitched, "Washington is a violent woman, I want cantaloupe flavor." "No." Sugu took an ice cream cone for South Dakota, and finally turned to the convenience store clerk who seemed to be named Peyton and said, "I bought it for you." Try it in terms of politeness, Sugu was still very polite. The most ignorant person among all the people was Peyton. She looked at the ice cream handed to her, blinked her eyes in confusion, and thought to herself, "How did things develop like this?" She said, "I have some too." "Well, who are you, and what is Anna's identity?" "Anna, does South Dakota have such a name now?" "I am the admiral and she is the ship girl." Without an admiral by her side, the ship girl is used to hiding her identity so as not to cause too much trouble due to her powerful power. After all, there are always people who like to use moral kidnapping to ask the ship girl to do something. Without the admiral by her side, the ship girl will easily feel embarrassed. But when we return to the admiral, everything will be fine. All the troublesome matters can be left to the admiral. The ship girl only needs to attack when necessary. This is the division of labor between the admiral and the ship girl. Sugu briefly told Peyton about his and South Dakota's identities. Peyton showed a surprised expression and said, "Anna is actually the South Dakota. I can't tell at all. I still thought that the ship girls were all powerful, but Anna, no, South Dakota no, she looks a little dazed and a little funny." After finally ending the farce, Sugu talked about his coming here, cliches, and the story of his return. South Dakota said, "Our original garrison has been abandoned." Sugu said, "But the current town hall is already very good. Although the garrison is not big, it has all the internal organs even though it is small. All kinds of facilities in the Tutelary mansion are basically in place now, whether they are entertainment facilities or work facilities." Before leaving, Sugu had specially approved Alaska to free up a room in the governor's mansion to build a KTV, so that he would have another kind of entertainment after returning this time. South Dakota blinked his big eyes, and then said, "Then I can have a separate room." "Of course, no problem." South Dakota showed longing in his eyes and said, "That's great." Washington laughed from the side, and she said, "Admiral, do you know where South Dakota lives now?" Not to slap anyone in the face, South Dakota said, "It's long-winded. Where I live, there is good greenery and fresh air. The spring is humid, the summer is hot, and you don't see any sunlight all day long. Long-winded, 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 long-winded." As a clerk in a convenience store, there were no customers and Peyton had nothing to do. She stood by and listened and suddenly said, "Are you leaving?" South Dakota patted her chest. In fact, her cup size was not that big, and said, "Of course I'm leaving. I won't be a store clerk anymore." Peyton hesitated and said, "But I don't want the salary anymore." Peyton was silent for a moment, then plucked up the courage to say, "Although you are a ship girl, our convenience store is just a small convenience store. You worked here for half a month, made 3 wrong checkouts, and broke 4 dozen eggs. I ate a lot of things in the store, and I helped you keep the accounts. And you also asked the store manager to advance 1 month's salary. Even if you don't want the salary, you still owe." South Dakota opened his eyes wide and said quickly, "Stop talking, stop talking." In the end, South Dakota still needs Sugu to clean up the mess. Looking for the Lost Ship Girl. Author, Hai De Rong Yan. Chapter 425. Leaving the convenience store, everyone went to where South Dakota lived. It's not far from the convenience store, just across a path filled with shrubs. It was a community surrounded by high-rise buildings, although I just heard that the rental housing in South Dakota didn't seem to be that good. However, looking at the surrounding environment at this time, it seems that South Dakota is a good place to live. Sugu said, "It's nice here." Suddenly Washington patted his shoulder and motioned him not to look up. "South Dakota works in a convenience store. Do you think she can afford to live in a place like this? Whether she buys or rents a house?" Sugu looked away doubtfully. "Although the civilization of this world cannot be compared with the world where we originally lived. However, whether the conditions are good or bad can be judged by comparing these things. This community is obviously a mid to high-end community. Considering the current conditions in South Dakota, working requires an advance salary. It is really difficult to live in such a high-end community." Sugu said, "What kind of place does she live in?" "It's right in front, you'll know just by looking at it." There was no wonderful unfolding. After simply walking through a flower bed, Washington picked off a leaf and said, "This is what South Dakota calls good greenery and fresh air. It's not a park bench, which is already good. Admiral, even for South Dakota, you are so dark, it's too much. As he spoke, Sugu soon saw South Dakota waving in front. South Dakota stood in front of a garage and took out the key. Now Sugu could think of it, it must be a rental house converted from a garage. After all, after graduating, he had been looking for a job in the city and had been to many places to rent houses, such as communities and urban villages. He had also seen many rental houses converted from garages. Sugu said, "This garage, the conditions." Washington spread his hands and said, "I invited her, but she doesn't want to live with me. Although they often don't deal with each other, they are still sisters." Washington invited South Dakota to live with them. However, due to shame or fear of being bullied by Washington at any time if they lived under the same roof, South Dakota rejected Washington's request. It's just that she doesn't have the outstanding abilities like Washington, and she's not willing to work as a mercenary or guard as a ship girl. She insisted on fighting with Washington, and felt that she could still survive well even without using the ship girl's abilities. Of course you can survive, but life is too miserable. In Sugu's memory, although he didn't remember the game very clearly. But when a battleship like South Dakota is built, it is usually put into the exercise team immediately. After many exercises, I will definitely have it at the full level. Although the South Dakota's equipment may be worse than that of a battleship like the Bismarck, it is at least not worse than that of the Kozai. The battleship definitely has the most basic set of equipment. South Dakota may not be considered the top combat force in the game, but here, it's a little more conservative. After all, some of the ship girls in the garrison are also very strong, such as the Nagato on Zyongta Island. According to Richelieu, they are not much weaker than them. Besides, after all, ship girls have been around for many years, and some ship girls have been fighting for so many years and are still very strong. However, even with this conservative calculation, it is estimated that South Dakota has at least more than 95% of the ship girls in the entire world without any problem. Of course, it's already like this, and there's no point in talking about it anymore. The place where South Dakota lives is a very old garage. Because the ceiling of the garage is very high, it is built into a simple duplex with wooden boards. Although the decoration is not very good, it still looks well laid out. In addition, there is a lot of furniture in the room, including seats, wardrobes, etc. Looking around, South Dakota seems to be quite casual. Anyway, there are many books and comics thrown casually on the table. South Dakota put his hands behind his back and said, "Admiral, how is it? Although it's not very good, it's very warm." "What else can you say? You just have the words 'come on, praise me' written on your face." Sugu nodded and said, "It looks good." "Of course, I saw the duplex and fell in love with it," South Dakota said. Washington said, "Isn't it because the rent here is cheap? Anyway, I remember sleeping here at night, like a steamer. It's so annoying. If I had known I wouldn't have let you stay here. The first floor is the living room, and the second floor is the room." Guam walked along the narrow wooden stairs to the second floor. Then entering South Dakota's room, she immediately saw South Dakota's underwear and pajamas thrown haphazardly on the bed. Guam exclaimed, "Purple underwear." Sugu originally wanted to go up and have a look, but he was halfway up the stairs when he was immediately pulled by South Dakota. He saw South Dakota lowering his head and tightening his grip on his clothes, and finally had no choice but to stand down. "To be honest, I still want to see it in my heart, but doing so will obviously have some bad effects." Sugu returned to the first floor, and South Dakota stepped on the stairs. Walking up the stairs, Kwanda was pushed downstairs reluctantly, and after a while, there was the sound of packing things. Soon after, South Dakota walked downstairs with a slightly red face and said, "Everyone, sit down and I'll wash the fruits for you." Washington waved his hand and said, "You don't need to wash it, I took it all out. Washington was carrying a fruit basket. She looked very familiar with this place. South Dakota said, "You are so annoying, messing with my things, I usually can't bear to eat." Hearing what South Dakota said, Sugu couldn't stop eating the apple. It's so pitiful. Your conditions in South Dakota are too difficult. Washington was biting an apple. Her favorite thing to do was to poke South Dakota's sore spots. She said next to her, "I remembered that South Dakota's bed collapsed once before when she slept on it." Because she was worried that if she asked the landlord for help, she would be asked for compensation. So he asked me to help him hammer the nails with a sad face. "Admiral, look at that cabinet, it's quite beautiful. It's old furniture that I got rid of. I didn't want it anymore," and then she moved it over happily. South Dakota heard what Washington said and said, "Luzuo, then take all your things away, I don't care." Washington said, "Now that the Admiral is back, you have learned to show off your authority. It turns out who pulled my clothes and said, 'You don't want it anyway, just give it to me.'" Washington imitated South Dakota's tone, which was vivid and vivid. South Dakota looked ashamed and angry, clenched his fists, and looked ready to fight Washington. And here, I remember. When talking about gossip, Washington spent most of the time talking about embarrassing things about South Dakota, and the rest was South Dakota rebutting and explaining. After eating the apples not long after, Sugu stood up and looked out the small window. The sun was getting redder and redder. Apparently it was almost sunset in the evening. He said, "It's time for us to go." South Dakota showed a surprised expression and said, "Are you just leaving?" "Alas, I won't be able to catch the train back today." Washington stretched out his finger to poke South Dakota's head and said, "What's growing inside your head? We just came here to take a look, and we have to go back. Now North Carolina is still at home. Then shall we come back?" "Only you will come back," Washington said. "Admiral, won't you sleep here at night?" Washington finally couldn't stand it anymore. She reached out and pinched South Dakota's face, pulled South Dakota's face into a pie shape, and said, "Of course you sleep at my place. Do you want to sleep in this shabby place like yours? How many people can sleep here?" South Dakota said, "Then I won't come back. I will also live with you. What if you leave behind my back?" Sugu was looking at the potted cactus plant on the counter. When he heard the sound, he thought with evil thoughts, "South Dakota, you have too many ideas. Little black pie is so cute, how could I let you go?" Washington tilted his head and said, "I won't let you live. I have to go. Then you can only sleep on the floor. I sleep in the room next to North Carolina. My clothes are still there. I haven't lived there in a while." Sugu listened to the conversation between Washington and South Dakota with a strange expression. Why did this conversation feel so familiar to people? Washington, who obviously cares about people but always wants to bully them, and South Dakota, who wants to improve himself but is clumsy. Sugu sat next to Richelieu and whispered, "Richelieu, those youth romance novels like The Domineering President Falls in Love with Me that you read, are the plots in those books somewhat similar to theirs? You look at the character of Washington, you look at the character of South Dakota." Richelieu looked at Washington and South Dakota, nodded thoughtfully, then suddenly thought of something, and his face turned slightly red. With his white sandals tapping on the ground, Richelieu stretched out his foot and kicked Sugu gently and said, "What are you talking about, Admiral? I have never read that kind of book." He actually said that he had never seen it. Tisk tisk tisk, Sister Lee, you look so cute now, I love you so much. What do you think about me giving Washington a ring and letting Washington marry South Dakota? Richelieu said, "Washington will strangle you." "No way, strangle me to death, then you have to protect me." "Of course I will protect the Admiral." Guam stood next to her, and she reached out to stir up her long blue hair. She saw Washington and South Dakota arguing. The two of them were quarreling till their faces turned red, but no one was really angry during the quarrel, so they obviously had a good relationship. She saw Sugu and Richelieu sitting side by side. Richelieu, who originally looked like a cold female knight, now looks like a little girl, but her face is not as shy as a little girl. As expected, she is the most romantic French ship girl. At first she thought she was as serious and rigid as Bismarck, but now she seems to be alluring. At the beginning, you didn't come out because you wanted to grow like a rabbit, but now it seems that you haven't done anything serious. Finally, she saw Akagi eating by himself. Hey, your man is about to be seduced, but you still eat, foodies are so happy. Guam looked around and felt that he was the most unnecessary. Looking for the Lost Ship Girl. Author, Hai De Rong Yan. Chapter 426. The setting sun shines into the room from the window, and the sunlight is divided into blocks by the window frame. In the room, South Dakota was jumping up and down with his backpack, looking furious. She was planning to put away her important things. I haven't lived here for a long time in total, because after signing the contract, I have to live for a long time. Now it seems that there is no way to get the deposit back. Although it's a bit regretful, now it's time to leave. I will go to the apartment in Washington to see North Carolina later. The apartment is not far from here, but it also takes a lot of time to go back and forth. Although he didn't want to admit it, South Dakota still knew the situation here. He couldn't entertain so many people, so the Admiral would definitely live in Washington's apartment. Of course she knew that no one would abandon her, but since everyone lived together, did she have to come back alone? You don't want this kind of thing. In this case, it would be better to live in Washington for 2 days. South Dakota said, "You guys wait a minute, I'll pack my clothes." Washington said impatiently, hurry up, finish it in 1 minute, or we have to leave." South Dakota stood under the eaves holding a clothes drying pole. She said, "No one can finish cleaning up in 1 minute. Yes, you don't even need to bring money, because my most precious thing is knowledge, and these things are all in my head, but you, well, I can't say." South Dakota took off her clothes from under the eaves, put them on the table in the room, folded the clothes one by one and stuffed them into her backpack. She said, "Do you mean there is nothing in my head?" Washington crossed his arms and said, "Aren't you very smart?" South Dakota was furious. She was about to poke Washington with the clothes drying pole, but Washington snatched the clothes drying pole back and stabbed her in the stomach instead. Although it doesn't hurt, it feels good. If left alone, Washington and South Dakota would obviously be able to quarrel all day long. Sugu coughed and said, "South Dakota, please clean up quickly, or we will help you." Now that Sugudu had spoken, as a ship girl, she had to listen. South Dakota could only glare at the smiling Washington. "No, I'm fine." South Dakota waved her hands as she spoke. She didn't have the habit of writing a diary. She also didn't have any memorable photos, and she didn't even have a few memorable things. There is no need to bring bedding, towels, or toiletries, as they will definitely be found in the Tutelary residence. After thinking for a while, she finally dug out a bunch of small bracelets from the drawer, which she had bought with her salary. It's not expensive, but you still have to bring it. Apart from these, the only thing left to bring is various clothes. Anyway, you really don't need help with these things. It's easy to be shy if you ask others to help you pack your underwear. Washington looked at the gaping backpack and said, "I remember you bought a pair of string underwear, remember to bring it with you." "I didn't buy it, you only have it yourself, talk too much." Washington said indifferently, "I have it, and so do you." Sugu was listening and thought to himself, "You guys are talking without paying attention to the people around you, you are so unscrupulous." South Dakota continued to pack his things, and several people sitting in the room chatted. Sugu said, Washington, Xiao Zai said before that you were working as a lawyer. You have been working as a lawyer for a while. When Xiao Zai traveled around in search of himself, he looked dusty when we first met him. That was the most touching thing. However, although they met many people during the journey, they all separated. Zai returned to the former guardhouse, and they were missing. In short, we are all far apart now, and there is no point in talking about it anymore. If you can't find it, you can't find it? After listening, Washington said, I remember that the Admiral met Xiao Zai first. Since Xiao Zai knows that I am working as a lawyer, then she must know that I am here. You have been living here for nearly a year, and you just came here now. Sugu said, she only knows that you are a lawyer and doesn't know where you are. How reliable do you expect her to be? Washington put his arms on the table, stretched out his hand to support the side of his face, and said, Xiao Zai has courage. Sugu proudly said, that's my little house. Looking around and finding strange eyes looking at him, Sugu coughed and said, how about North Carolina? North Carolina is at home. She is probably sleeping now. She will be very happy to see you when she goes back. Now that North Carolina was mentioned, what did Sugu think of? He said, remember that North Carolina has many forms. Is she an adult or a child now? In the game, North Carolina's normal form is a girl, and her broken form is a royal sister. All in all, she is a pretty magical ship girl. Apart from the game, Sugu thought of the previous painter settings in North Carolina. In the setting, North Carolina has many forms. It is a god who has lived for many years. There are all forms from small to large, and the smallest form is the cutest among them. Of course, there is still a gap between these game settings and artist settings and reality. Just like the submarine U-81 is considered a druid in the artist setting, but this is modern society, and there is no magical existence like a druid that can communicate with beasts. U-81 is just an ordinary ship girl here, and the three little wolves are considered average ship outfits. Well, okay, U-81 is not an ordinary ship girl, she is so rare that it is almost like an urban legend. Sugu thought of U-81. Because U-81 always liked to be shy, it was a pity that he was only allowed to hug her after such a rare occasion. U-81 is not a druid, it can appear through salvage, and North Carolina is not a god, it can be built. Of course, they are not ordinary beings either. Some places believe that spirits are gods. There are 8 million gods in this world. They believe that everything has spirits and there are gods everywhere they go. 8 million represents infinity. So Ship Girl is indeed a god in the eyes of these people. In short, North Carolina has many forms, but it has not shrunk here. Sugu has heard Guam mention this. Washington said, she is now used to maintaining a juvenile form, even more juvenile than before. Sugu opened his eyes wide and said, younger, how many years older? The younger, the better. There is a lack of little lowly battleships in the garrison, only a small house. After all, Veneto has not been found yet. Washington said, I can't tell. Just wait until you go back and see for yourself. Girls don't count. Just wait until we get back. Don't worry about this moment. Sugu thought about it and said, Washington, do you remember Veneto? What's wrong with her? Although she has a young figure, she is actually a serious pseudo-loli. What about North Carolina? It was impossible for Sugu to judge the mental age of the ship girl based on her appearance. When dealing with ship girls, different mental ages require different postures. When facing real Lolita and fake Lolita, you still have to maintain different attitudes. If it is a real Lolita, then hugging and hugging is okay, but if it is a fake Lolita, hugging and hugging will have a bad impact. Although fake Lolita often represent legal Lolita, they are high. Washington remembered that North Carolina was kidnapped in the morning, and then she transformed. When she was in his office, she maintained the appearance of a little girl. At that time, she was considered a pseudo-loli. However, she doesn't restrain her character at all now. Now that such a long time has passed, she will probably recover after sleeping and resting. Just think of her as a little girl. Guam said from the side, the Admiral must hope that North Carolina is a little girl, after all, she is an evil Lolita control. Sugu said, nonsense. Washington was speechless and said, I remember that the Admiral likes big ships and big guns. Sugu has been able to regard his ship girl as one of his own very well, and will not wear a hypocritical mask in front of his ship girl to hide his feelings. He said, I like big ships and cannons, and little Lolita liked them too. Of course, even though he said he wouldn't hide anything, Sugu didn't say anything else. Little Lolita liked big ships and cannons the most. Naturally, the game will be based on strength. After all, the state of mind is different. If you are strong enough, you will still like it even if the vertical painting is not so exquisite. If the strength is insufficient, no matter how exquisite the vertical painting is, Scharnhorst still has glory. The vertical painting is very beautiful, and I am not in the mood for leveling at all, and I won't get married. Among all the people, Xiaozai is the only exception. Even though he is completely a vase, he is still at full level. Admiral joins the Would You Like Some Rabbit Today club. Sugu had heard of that club where all Lolita fans gathered many times. He first heard about it when he was on the passenger ship with Xiaozai, and then the name followed him all the way to become the Admiral, and now he hears it often. Sugu said, are they available here too? That's a worldwide organization, a perverted organization. Sugu quickly distanced himself from the relationship and said, I'm not a pervert, I just have love for little girls. Washington said lightly, when I went to the military police to defend those admirals, they all said this. Sugu's face was expressionless. Guam chuckled and patted his shoulder. Sugu patted Guam's palm, looked at the blue-haired girl, and said, Guam, you are a young kid. You are causing trouble everywhere. I order you in the name of the Admiral to sing a song for everyone now. Guam showed a naughty smile and pretended to have wheat in her hand. She said, hoo-hoo, cough. I am Blue Rose. Thank you to the big boss Sugu for the reward. Now I will sing a song for everyone, ha ha ha. It didn't take long for South Dakota to pack her things, panting while carrying her large backpack. Then he put his backpack on the ground, bent down and put his hands on his knees, which made him look even cuter. Washington said, have you packed everything? It's packed. Is there nothing you forgot to bring? No. We are waiting for you to speak out and show it yourself. Have you really not forgotten anything? South Dakota looked up, glared at Washington, and said, what, that's a mess. Washington stretched out his hand towards South Dakota and said, you took away a lot of oath rings from the Admiral's office. The one on your hand was given to you by the Admiral. Apart from that ring, where did the other rings go? South Dakota murmured. She moved her long seaweed hair to reveal a necklace at her neck. She lifted up the necklace, and a ring appeared from the groove on her chest. South Dakota proudly said, how could I forget that thing? Of course I brought it with me, here it is. I'm telling you to give it back, Washington yelled. I want to keep it as a souvenir. The knife is sharpened to the pig and the sheep, and the pig and sheep are of course South Dakota. Soon after, Sugu got a ring. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Looking for the Lost Ship Girl. Author, Hai De Rong Yan. Chapter 427. The curtains are drawn in the living room, and the sunlight passes through the curtains, giving the entire living room an orange-red color. The marble tiles reflect blurry figures, and tropical fish swim in the aquarium. Although the golden pendulum of the grandfather clock is swinging and clicking continuously, it all gives people a quiet feeling. North Carolina sat on the sofa, her head lowered, her long silver hair pouring down from both sides. Such an action, if seen by outsiders, would probably be considered a sign of discomfort. It's just that she is a ship girl, she can't catch a cold or a fever, and it can even be said that she can't get sick. It's hard to understand that she makes such an action. She didn't feel any discomfort, just a little troubled because she couldn't sleep. In the morning, I encountered a kidnapping, and I transformed and taught those vicious criminals a lesson. At noon, I found my sister's office and talked to my sister Washington about what I had encountered. Then I came out of the office and prepared to go home. I ate something casually on the roadside and looked coldly at the corgi with its tail cut off in the restaurant. Corgi, who usually always surrounds him, didn't dare to surround him today. It seems that even small animals can realize that they are different from the North Carolina of yesterday, even if they still look the same. After dinner, I didn't buy ice cream like before, but bought fruit at the supermarket on the roadside. Fruits are quite expensive, but strawberries can be paid by the number, so I finally bought a small box. Not long after I returned to the apartment, I wasn't going to sleep right away, so I took the comic book on the coffee table. It was a comic book that the little girl read, well, now the adult self can't read it at all. Then I looked at the graffiti I usually left on the drawing board with crayons. Although I have never had much appreciation, my painting skills are terrible. The appearance of a ship girl will be affected by her character, but for herself. Because you can control your own form, your form and appearance affect your way of thinking. Different forms have different ways of thinking and personalities. If the body becomes like that of a little girl, then the mentality will gradually become that of a little girl. The way of thinking becomes a little girl who likes ice cream, candy, climbing trees, and painting instead of axes, chopping and fighting. Of course, it's not that the form changes, the way of thinking will change. Generally speaking, the way of thinking should be according to one's own will. If it is deliberately restrained, even the form of a little girl still has the way of thinking of an adult. If it is not restrained, the way of thinking will soon become that of a little girl. I actually don't want to stay in Yuji's form unless necessary, because it's very tiring. But maintaining the form of a Lolita or a girl and wanting to think the same way as an adult is also very tiring. Just be a little girl, you won't be in danger anyway, who can hurt the ship girl? Besides, if you want, you can also change your form at any time. If you encounter real danger, such as being attacked by a deep-sea ship girl, whether you like it or not, you will definitely appear if you break the state. When noon was approaching afternoon, I prepared to take a nap. I planned to take a nap and quickly become a carefree little girl, however, I couldn't fall asleep. There was no reason why. I didn't know why. Anyway, whether you are lying on your back, side, or stomach. Finally, the bed was replaced by a sofa, but the ending was still the same. I had no choice but to sit on the sofa, and the above scene occurred. Then North Carolina thought about taking a shower. It might be easier to fall asleep after taking a shower. When I got out of the shower, I simply put on a large t-shirt, with the hem of the t-shirt covering my thighs. Even so, I still couldn't sleep. It's really annoying, and why Washington still hasn't come back. The office is her own boss, so she doesn't need to commute to get off work on time. She usually comes back very early at this time. She likes to work at home. Are you teasing the South Dakota again? It's so boring. Therefore, it is better to be a little girl, carefree. When you are bored, you can draw, read comics, and do many things at this time. Now, with an adult's mind, everything feels boring. They just want to fight, and being a warrior is what they should do. After sitting in the living room for an unknown amount of time, North Carolina finally returned to her room. She still couldn't sleep. As the evening wore on, she stood by the window and suddenly heard the slight sound of the door opening and footsteps. Squeak. Dong dong. North Carolina looked back, thinking that Washington was finally back, now in the entrance hall, now in the living room. Something seemed wrong. There was more than one person hearing footsteps, so South Dakota was coming too. Listening carefully, you can see that there are many more footsteps than just two people. On the other side, everyone left the rental house in South Dakota and went back to the law firm in Washington. Washington explained some things, and then everyone went to the garage. Washington is not a convenience store clerk like South Dakota. As a barrister, she owns her own car. However, she drives with a strong style and often spends half of her time in the garage. The car was still not repaired, but fortunately the office was very close to the apartment, just across the street. Soon I found an apartment. From any point of view, the apartment I lived in Washington was much better than the rented apartment in South Dakota. Because as long as two people live there, there are only 3 bedrooms and 2 living rooms. The interior of the apartment looks great, and there is no comparison to renting in South Dakota. This place is even much better than the rooms in the Toot Larry mansion, but the feeling of warmth is much less. Probably because the decoration style here is completely frigid, with all the cold colors. Admiral, stay at my place for the night. It's much better than staying with some idiot. South Dakota has a puffy mouth that feels like a puffer fish and makes you want to pinch it. Sugu ignored their argument and said, "Where is North Carolina?" Still have to take a look at North Carolina, the legendary North Carolina where Loli can be a royal sister. Washington said, "I encountered the kidnapping incident in the morning, and now I am probably sleeping to recover." After saying that, she looked at Richelieu and Akagi and said, "Everyone, please sit down wherever you want, don't be polite. Guam, you and your sister have stayed here many times, I don't need to tell you, by the way, why didn't your sister come over?" Guam shrugged and said, "Poor sister." Washington said, "When North Carolina wakes up, let's go to the restaurant. I know a restaurant that is very good. There are many customers, so I have to go there early and have some dessert." "Yes, I'll treat you." Washington looked at this. He said to the South Dakota, "You don't have to go. You said you would never pay me a penny and eat something from me." South Dakota jumped to his feet and said, "Whatever is yours, everything you have belongs to the Admiral, and your whole person belongs to the Admiral. I eat what belongs to the Admiral, not you." South Dakota is surprisingly resourceful. Sugu looked at the two of them. South Dakota and Washington kept bickering along the way. Even if he was left alone, they were the best CP combination. I don't know if I gave South Dakota a ring. If so, I think I stole her love with a knife, and I don't want to break up their relationship. Think about it, if you have a ring in your hand, if you give it to Washington, it won't count as breaking them apart. No, it's so evil. Is there any special food here? Does black pepper steak count? Let me think about it. Smoked salmon and fried tuna, we will have barbecue tonight. South Dakota said, "Has the Admiral ever eaten an avocado?" Guam suddenly said, "New Orleans grilled wings." Washington said, "I think of New Orleans, she took care of Quincy by herself. They must have had a hard time." While talking, there was a sudden sound of pushing the door open, and then everyone saw North Carolina, who looked like a Lolita, with long silver hair hanging down, and she was listless. South Dakota was the least interested. She saw North Carolina, which she liked more than Washington. "My lovely North Carolina, look who is here. Hey, Admiral, are you happy? Are you excited?" North Carolina stared at the familiar figure, and even forgot to pat South Dakota's hand away, and said, I am not the North Carolina you are familiar with. I still look like a little girl, but I am an adult at heart. So don't use that tone, and I spoke and let go of the hand holding my face. North Carolina smiled and said, Admiral. Guam stood behind Sugu. She pushed Sugu and whispered, as you wish, little lowly North Carolina. You can tell by looking at her that she wasn't even angry when South Dakota pinched her face like that. Okay, you can pinch your face, touch your head, or even hug her, it doesn't matter. Looking for the Lost Ship Girl. Author, Hai De Rong Yan. Chapter 428. South Dakota pinched North Carolina's face, as if it wanted to bully North Carolina again for all the bullying it had received from Washington. She first pinched North Carolina's face, then rubbed North Carolina's head, and then she was hit on the head by Washington and dragged away. How dare you take action against your own sister, it's really lawless. Sugu looked towards North Carolina. As Washington said, North Carolina is younger than before. It can be described as a little Lolita. She was wearing a big blue t-shirt with letters all over the chest, exposing her collarbone and shoulders. I was definitely not wearing any pants, not even hot pants. You don't know if you are wearing underwear, but one thing you can confirm is if you open your clothes and look at your underwear. Even if you are an admiral, you will definitely get a slap in the face. Sugu squatted in front of North Carolina and stretched out his hands to touch North Carolina's cheeks. North Carolina, the voice dragged on for a long time. Sugu has been in this world for so long. At the beginning, even if he could talk to his ship girl normally, he couldn't be very familiar with her. However, my own ship girl treats me warmly and often faces that kind of expectant look in her eyes. If you have a cold attitude, it will hurt people's hearts casually. In order for the ship girl not to feel indifferent, she forced herself to do some intimate actions. I feel like I can't say it's good or bad. After all, she is such a beautiful girl. How could a man not like her? In fact, there are some difficulties. They are all unfamiliar faces, and I am afraid of embarrassment and rejection. In short, a person who originally didn't like talking to strangers has suddenly become a familiar person. North Carolina said, Admiral. Sugu put his hand on North Carolina's head and said, we meet again. Yes. Honestly, North Carolina is cute and completely different from the game. A man relies on his clothes and a horse relies on his saddle. In the game, he wears a jacket and moves like he is riding a bicycle. There are people who either like or hate the pop-up. North Carolina is different now. Her fair and shapely thighs are exposed from the hem of her big t-shirt. She stands barefoot on the marble tiles. She looks like she wants to be hugged. Sugu heard from Guam that the royal sister in North Carolina was very wild, like a female leopard. So now lowly North Carolina is a young cat, very cute. I'm here to take you home this time. Sugu said this, looking forward to North Carolina's happy expression. To his dismay, however, North Carolina showed little joy. Unlike all the little girls in the garrison, North Carolina's expression did not look like a little girl's, nor did it look like a destroyer or a submarine, but rather like those battleships that were unfazed by honor or disgrace. They will stand next to you and smile, but they rarely want to be excited or hugged. What, are you feeling uncomfortable? Sugu was a little confused. Why was North Carolina so cold? With such a personality, it shouldn't be right. Not only in Guam, but also in Washington and South Dakota, Lolita North Carolina is a very cute and shy little girl with a carefree personality. After all, South Dakota dared to pinch her face and rub her head so unscrupulously. With South Dakota's character, if North Carolina really looked like this, how could she dare? Sugu remembered that a large ship like North Carolina would basically train to the full level through exercises. Now that you have reached the full level, you will definitely gain full favorability by the way. You are a ship girl that we have a lot of affection for. Hey, since you are not naturally cold-tempered, do you think you are still a loli that leaves people with a sweet taste? It can't be that in just a short period of time, his favorable opinion dropped from 100 to his current indifference. Think about it, even if you have a good impression, every ship girl behaves differently. There are passionate ship girls like my sister-in-law Saratoga, and there are also people like Bazi, who feel that there is no difference between feeling full of favor and dissatisfied with the favor. Although I occasionally think about it, if it were not a wedding ship, even a casual Bazi would not sleep in your bed casually. Each ship girl has her own personality and temper. It's not that you are the admiral, everyone will revolve around you. Even the most clingy destroyers will be hated if you insist on making them attend classes and kicking their sand castles into pieces. Maybe it's because I just fell asleep and it feels uncomfortable to wake up now, so I have no enthusiasm at all. Sugu remembered that Xiaozai was angry when he got up. An ordinary destroyer, even though she is a ship girl, behaves like an ordinary little girl. It would be unpleasant if you were woken up at noon without getting enough sleep. Or in the hot summer, if you sleep for a long time, you will feel uncomfortable when you wake up. If you want to do anything with them at that time, even as an admiral, they may not pay attention to you. Don't ask Sugu why he knows so clearly. It's just that North Carolina doesn't look uncomfortable, so maybe her favorability has dropped. If his favor dropped, it would be better to improve his favor. Sugu had never been afraid of trying to favor the little girl. Sugu said, "I'm really sorry for not coming back for so long." Taking the initiative to apologize, this move has always been unfavorable when facing my own ship girl. As soon as these words come out, coupled with the guilty look in your eyes, as long as the ship girl still thinks about you, she will immediately regain her favorability as much as she loses it. The ideal is very plump, the reality is very skinny, North Carolina said softly, "It doesn't matter. There is no relationship in the mouth, and there is no enthusiasm at all, which is worrying. You little girl is a bit difficult to deal with, but he doesn't have the right to accuse the other party. Fortunately, he still has a trump card. If it's really difficult for an adult ship girl to use such a move, it doesn't matter at all when facing a little girl." Sugu said, "I miss you." To achieve the best results, the killer trick needs to be supplemented by a hug. It's really not good to hug an adult ship girl, but a lowly ship girl can use this trick without restraint. Sugu said, he stretched out his arms to hug North Carolina, and rubbed the side of his face against North Carolina's hair. North Carolina has a good figure. Although it is not as fleshy as Xiaozai, it is very comfortable to hold, so it is not bad either. Guam said from the side, look, Lolakan." Sugu turned around, glared angrily, and said, "Guam, you talk too much. First rub your face, then hug, and wait until you see your underwear." How can it be? Sugu thought of his underwear, and he remembered that he once heard those "Would you like some rabbits today?" the big guys in the club said. The most beautiful scenery in the world. When you ask a destroyer to show you your underwear, any destroyer who knows a little bit will shyly refuse. They hold down their skirts, showing that shy look. Sugu had never seen that kind of scene before. He always wanted to see the underwear directly. Of course, those gentlemen said so, and no one was a fool. Anyone who dares to do such a thing will definitely be punished by the gendarmerie. Speaking of which, there were many cults in the academy, and one of them taught you how to kneel down and ask your wife to see her underwear. No matter which world you are in, such a gentleman is indispensable. If you ask such a thing to a strange girl, you will definitely be regarded as an idiot and a pervert, but asking your own ship girl feels just right. Sugu had heard of someone doing such a thing, but of course he didn't know the exact truth. The evil thoughts in my heart kept rising, and I finally knocked on my head to calm myself down. Sugu said, "North Carolina, I heard that you were kidnapped in the morning." "Yes. Is it dangerous?" Danger. The Admiral will protect you from now on. North Carolina simply nodded and looked cute, so even this gesture was still adorable. The voice was so cold and it didn't win his favor. Sugu looked at Guam and said silently, "What should we do now?" Guam shrugged and said, "It's none of my business. Anyone who asks you to come back now will be angry." Washington had just taught South Dakota a lesson when she saw Sugu and North Carolina. North Carolina shouldn't behave like this, a suspicion flashed in her heart. However, South Dakota wanted to die by her side, so she said something like she's probably angry, just give her a hug, or lift her up. After all, it didn't matter for the Admiral and the ship's wife to do these things. Then she went on to teach South Dakota a lesson. Since Washington said so, Sugu put his hand on North Carolina's armpit and raised it. Okay, it's all my fault. Stop being angry, my North Carolina, I love you the most. Sugu can now say the word favorite to many people, unlike before, which was so coy. North Carolina was held up in the air, like a doll that would not resist. She was not angry. She was sighing and said seriously, "I'm not angry, really, alas." She looked at Sugu, who was her admiral, and thought to herself, "I am also in a dilemma, and I am also very happy, but how should I show it? Moreover, should I say it, how should I say that sentence? I don't really understand that type of words, but I think it's quite appropriate. I think it's like this: I am a Lolita with my sister's heart. So don't take me for a real loli, it doesn't feel bad to be lifted up high." Looking for the Lost Ship Girl. Author, Hai De Rong Yan. Chapter 429. North Carolina sat on the sofa, Sugu sat next to him, and he leaned on the coffee table. If Washington had paid a little more attention, he might have been confused. His sister's Lolita form was sitting in a much more upright posture than usual. At this time, it is completely different from usual. You are working on the coffee table, and she is also lying on the coffee table looking at you. Even if I sit on the sofa occasionally, my calves will keep shaking. Sugu held a crayon in his hand, and the crayon slid on the drawing board of the coffee table, making a squeaking sound. Sometimes he was writing vigorously, sometimes he was meditating. As he was drawing, he said, "First draw a circle, then draw an ellipse, draw 2 semicircles, and click 2 points here. This is a pig." With Loli's body and sister's heart, North Carolina looked helplessly at the Admiral sitting next to her. He took the crayon and wanted to show off his painting skills. After a long time, he put the drawing board in front of him like a show-off. "I thought there would be some kind of masterpiece, but I just drew a pig. And I have to say, the level is terrible. My sister always complains about her low emotional intelligence and being too direct in her speech." Seeing his admiral working so hard, North Carolina thought about whether to express his thoughts tactfully, then how to be tactful. It seemed that it would be better to avoid the important things. North Carolina racked his brains to think about it, pointed at the drawing board with his finger, and said, "The colors are so beautiful." Sugu was praised and said, "The circle is still not round. In fact, I am not good at crayon drawing." Richelieu had been sitting next to her, watching Sugu draw. She was already good at painting, although it was oil painting. At this time, I thought that since the Admiral can draw, we can exchange more techniques in the future. Moving his eyes, he saw at a glance that the drawing board was at the level of a primary school student. Even though it was her Admiral, she was unwilling to go against her will, and she didn't like to complain. In the end, she had no choice but to look away. Guam is not like Richelieu. She was eating a banana and looking at the drawing board on the coffee table. She couldn't help laughing and said, "Admiral, your skills are too bad. I think Cushing can draw better than you." Sugu glanced at Guam and said, "Go ahead and eat bananas." He smiled evilly at the thought of bananas. Guam was a little confused and said doubtfully, "Why are you smiling so exaggeratedly?" Sugu clapped the crayon in his hand and said, "I painted it like this on purpose. Drawing like this with crayon, the skill is so bad, naturally he behaves well." Then he looked at the drawing board and suddenly felt that this level was indeed a bit too bad. So he found a pencil from the side. Holding the pencil, his movements and demeanor were completely different. The pencil made a sound on the drawing board, rustling, and finally left several patterns on the drawing board. Sugu proudly said, "North Carolina, look at this." North Carolina looked over and saw that these paintings were by the same artist compared to the original ones. This time he could nod. Guam looked at it, pointed her finger on the drawing board, and said, "This is a dragon, what about this one?" "That's the dragon-slaying hero with an axe." "What the hell?" "Because it's a stick figure." "That's weird. Since you are painting just to gain favor, how can you paint seriously? What little loli likes to see serious paintings?" Sugu looked at North Carolina again and said, "I'll show you another magic trick." Casual. Sugu found playing cards, picked out 4 aces of diamonds, and said, "This is a butterfly card, so these cards will fly away like butterflies. Now they are at the bottom, I take them to the top, and then." North Carolina looked at Sugu and thought, he actually wanted to perform magic in front of him. Rabbit lived here for a lot of time before. When she was bored, she liked to perform magic tricks. These little magic tricks can be understood at a glance. The butterfly card magic is achieved by taking one more card. The poker in your hand disappears and is just clamped on the back of your hand. It is a very rough action. Since his admiral was so attentive, North Carolina thought about it and decided to say perfunctorily, "It's amazing." Sugu worked hard to gain favor, and Washington finally put South Dakota in order. "How's it going? You two have been communicating with each other for a long time." "Oh, it's your own fault. Admiral, you disappeared suddenly." Washington looked at North Carolina sitting next to Sugu, and the two looked much closer. "I thought to myself, even Lolita North Carolina has a little temper, which I couldn't see in the past." She didn't pay attention and continued, "North Carolina, let's change clothes and let's go out to eat." North Carolina entered the room, and Washington stood in the living room holding his handbag, looking through his wallet. Akagi is the ship girl who has been with Sugu the longest among all the people here. She looked at North Carolina's back and said with a smile, "What's wrong? The admiral's strategy failed." Sugu said, it's okay, I'm not so resistant now. I see you conquered land much faster." Sugu thought of the little girl with blue hair and a single ponytail. She was the destroyer Arashi that had repelled the deep-sea Yamato and then fished it out. That child is much more energetic, talkative, and active, does wrong things, and looks particularly cute and funny when he is confused. Compared with such a girl with a rich and energetic expression, there is a girl with a cold expression like North Carolina. Even though they are cold on the outside but hot on the inside, the difficulty of the strategy is the same. Because it is too cold, it is easy for people to become discouraged midway. Just like equipment, the synthesis is smooth and often feels cheap. Sugu said, "That's different. Lan has already called you Admiral." "Yeah, after all that time, it's a shame Cushing isn't there yet." North Carolina came out not long after, wearing the same clothes but wearing hot pants and shoes. Sugu said, "Why are her clothes so long?" Washington said, "If it fits too well, it will always stretch out when she transforms. It would be better if it were bigger and looser." Leaving the apartment and heading to the restaurant, Sugu looked at North Carolina, and Washington patted Sugu on the shoulder. "What are you looking at, Admiral? I didn't notice it before, but now I see that there are holes in her clothes, and her back is exposed. North Carolina can grow wings if she wants to, although the wings are too small to fly. I don't know whether they are part of the body or a ship uniform, but it can be said. There are holes in the clothes to expose her back, so that her wings can be spread out. It's summer and it's too hot, otherwise she would often wear an extra cloak. Sugu looked at North Carolina, who was walking in front of the team, and said, "It's amazing. The painter setting in the game seems to have an introduction to this aspect, but I didn't pay much attention to it. One thing is for sure, there is very little introduction to North Carolina in the academy. Although humans are very curious about ship girls and try to study them, to this day, no one can fully understand ship girls. After all, there are only a few ship girls in the first place. Besides, which admiral would be willing to let the ship girls be studied by others, and the ship girls themselves are also unwilling to do so? Nowadays, many ship girls have secrets, such as North Carolina's wings, or Hood's breasts, and many more. Soon after, everyone came to the restaurant. Melodious music was playing in the restaurant. Sugu didn't need to pay. Washington was also rich as a lawyer. Since Washington is still paying, South Dakota is not polite at all. She only picks the more expensive ones. After South Dakota finally finished ordering, Washington raised his hand and said, "I don't want anything I just said." "Asshole, bastard." Washington picked some special food and spread it all over the table. "Anyway, Akagi is here, so I don't have to worry about wasting food." At the dining table, Sugu unexpectedly discovered that South Dakota was quite delicious. No wonder the little fat man. After finishing the meal in the restaurant, we returned to the apartment again. In the living room, North Carolina looked at Sugu, and she asked doubtfully, "Admiral, why do you always look at my back?" Nothing. After hesitating, Sugu added, "I just heard Washington say that you can grow wings." "Yes, you can grow wings. Do you want to see them?" Sugu looked to the left and saw that Sheik Hung was not eating, but was sitting very dignified. She has always been able to endure loneliness. She can sit still without tea and just holding a glass of water. Richelieu stood by the window. Washington's apartment happened to be on a high floor. She was admiring the night view of Gasca. Gasca still had good lights at night. Guam played with his electronic keyboard. South Dakota was ordered by Washington to move various bedding. No one paid attention here, Sugu nodded. Then I started to wonder what I was doing so carefully. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Looking for the Lost Ship Girl. Author, Hai De Rong Yan. Chapter 430. North Carolina bowed forward slightly, then stretched out her hands to part her long silver hair, revealing her smooth bare back. Although she is still a little Lolita, and little Lolita are often associated with words like cute, such actions still give people a feeling of temptation. Her back was exposed, and her skin was fair. Whether it was her shoulder blades or spine, there was no difference between her and ordinary people. Sugu stared at North Carolina's back, and then saw that North Carolina's back was bulging, and fleshy wings were slowly growing out. Some are like shots of branches sprouting in fast forward, with wings growing and spreading, until finally the feathers appear and tremble, giving people a magical and weird beauty. Sugu said, "Is this a ship uniform or a part of the body?" North Carolina lay on the sofa and said, "I don't know. Anyway, it's not like a ship suit that can be removed. The wings are just wings. What are these wings for? If the clothes are torn, you can cover them in front of your chest. This is the only use of a bra." Sugu said, "Can I touch it?" He didn't wait for North Carolina to agree, thinking that since she was his ship girl, she would definitely not be rejected. "Although we didn't feel close to each other when we first met, it's much better now. After all, the goodwill is not in vain." He had no idea of the so-called goodwill. It was just that North Carolina had no choice but to cooperate in order to prevent his admiral from feeling left out. Sugu reached out and touched North Carolina's wings. Feeling the silky softness in my hands, I squeezed it unconsciously and used my fingers to help comb the feathers. The action of combing feathers made North Carolina tremble, and then a calm voice came, "Admiral, is that enough?" Sugu finally let go and said, "Okay." Guam initially fiddled with the keyboard with his electronic keyboard, but he couldn't just play casually at night. It's okay to play during the day, but at night, no matter how good or bad the sound is, it will definitely disturb people's rest. I don't know how good it is, but I know that I deliberately do things to disturb people. As a ship girl, I can't do such a thing. South Dakota, the easiest country to bully, is now being manipulated by Washington. Akagi and Richelieu really didn't dare to do anything to them. In the end, Guam could only turn her eyes to Sugu, and she saw Sugu touching North Carolina's wings. Looking at it like this, Gwanda blinked his eyes, sat next to Sugu, and whispered softly, "Admiral, don't you know that the wings are the sensitive point of North Carolina? You actually touched North Carolina's wings. It's too perverted." Sugu was a little surprised. He said, "I just touched her wings. Be sensitive. Don't lie to me. Don't pretend you don't know. I've never seen you touch Santiago's tail. Because you know that's her sensitive spot. The sensitive spots of a ship girl are always in places you can't imagine. Santiago has a voluptuous figure, especially when the underwear and tail are exposed in the big pop-up in the game. That look is so cute. In the game, Santiago is considered the only ship girl in her Atlanta class who has gained full favor. She's just as cute in real life, especially with her tail exposed. I really wanted to touch Santiago's tail, but when they came back they knew not to touch it randomly, it was Santiago's sensitive spot." Sugu remembered that he had just heard North Carolina's voice, and originally didn't think it was a big deal. At this time, he felt unsure and said, "It's not that big of a deal." He was just stunned for a moment, and suddenly saw the smile in Guam's eyes, and immediately knew that he had been deceived. "You guy." Just when Sugugan wanted to teach Guam a lesson, Washington's voice came from the guest room. "Admiral, come here." Sugu walked to the guest room and saw Washington and South Dakota wearing a turban, and said, "What's going on?" "Village woman South Dakota said she wants to sleep with you tonight." On the other side, because Sugu walked away, Guam turned to look at North Carolina. First impressions often count, and despite North Carolina's expressionless face, Guam still doesn't matter. In her mind, North Carolina is still the energetic little Lolita. Obviously teasing the little Lolita is the most interesting thing. Naturally, she didn't know that the little Loli in front of her had the heart of a royal sister, and the royal sister North Carolina was an existence that she didn't dare to joke about at all. Guam said, "North Carolina, did you just let the admiral touch your wings?" North Carolina said, "Yeah." Guam showed a regretful expression. "It's over, my sweet North Carolina, you're going to be in trouble." "What's inexplicable?" North Carolina looked at Guam in confusion. Guam showed a mischievous smile. She stretched out her hand and tapped the tip of North Carolina's nose, and said, "You know? The admiral is the most evil, he is a big pervert. At the beginning, I just asked you if it is okay to touch your wings. I will ask you later, are the hands okay? Since the wings have been touched, the arms don't matter at all. Do you know what the admiral likes to say the most? What he likes to say the most is, 'Come, I can lick all her bones off.' You can say such things, how perverted. Wait until you touch her hands, and then he asks you if you can touch her legs. Then he asks if you can put your arms around his shoulders. Then he asks if you can touch her breasts. Then she will trick you into bed step by step. Now that you have touched the wings of the admiral will take action on you later, and you are finished. North Carolina has a Lolita body and a sisterly heart. If she had a Lolita heart, she would probably be intimidated by Guam, but now North Carolina will not be intimidated by Guam at all. North Carolina said in a calm tone, neither sad nor happy, he wants to do that kind of thing, and I don't agree with it. He doesn't care about getting your heart at all, he just wants to get your body. How dare you kill the admiral? His admiral is not such a perverted person, and he still has some confidence in his admiral. However, she thought about Helena, who was always being poked and prodded, and she felt a little confused. It seemed that the admiral was really naughty and lustful. However, she still knew Guam's character, but unfortunately she was not good at pranks. North Carolina said, Guam, have you ever encountered such a thing? Call me Sister Guam, how many times have I told you? Of course I have not experienced that kind of thing, well, I have encountered it. Guam thought for a while, reluctant to let go of the child and not being able to trap the wolf. She said, yes, the admiral has done this to me before. I am the victim, so I understand it deeply. Now I remind you, you saw him, it's better to be careful and don't believe everything he says. If he wants to hug you, hit him. Guam talks eloquently, but one sentence is full of loopholes. North Carolina finally couldn't stand the strange aunt like Guam. She put her hand on her forehead like a little adult. Then she raised her head and showed a smile that was not what a little loli should have. Although her voice was still childish and her tone seemed a bit mature, she said, so, Guam, you have slept with the admiral for many nights now, and then you didn't get the wedding ring. I will ask the admiral and you guys later. What's going on? Forward. North Carolina continued, when the deep-sea battleship is advancing at a speed of 21, what do you need to do at that time? Facing the aircraft carriers over the horizon strike, that is, the opening, what should you do? How to launch a crossfire. American BA-4 How to operate Sri Lanka's 40mm anti-aircraft cannon correctly? I am the singer of the fleet, Guam Chan. In fact, you used to tie your hair into twin tails, which looked very good, but you are older and look nondescript. I am a young and invincible beautiful girl, ah. Guam lived here for a few days before becoming a cruise ship escort. During that time, my sister North Carolina helped me practice several times to adjust my condition a little. The words that North Carolina just said were obviously not something that lowly North Carolina could say. Guam looked at North Carolina, the smile on his face disappeared, and he said hesitantly, you. North Carolina sat on the couch and nodded. When did it start? It started when you came here. It has always been me. I should say since the morning, it has always been me. Sugu came back from the guest room, and he saw Guam and North Carolina sitting together. The atmosphere between the two of them seemed a little bit wrong. Guam actually sat next to her like a little daughter-in-law, with her hands folded in the push, looking ashamed. It's strange that Guam isn't causing trouble. Sugu said, what are you doing? North Carolina said, nothing, does Washington have anything to do with you? Sugu sat down next to North Carolina. Washington had naturally asked him to come over just now because of the night's accommodation. Of course, Sugu couldn't sleep with South Dakota. He didn't think that since he didn't take back South Dakota's ring, he was really worried that South Dakota would turn into a little bitch, although it was exciting to think about it. In the end, Sugu decided to sleep in the guest room with Akagya. He was now able to make a request like I want to sleep with my wedding ship very well, unlike before when Lexington said he wanted to sleep together, but Sugu don't dare. North Carolina asked, if it was the original plain appearance, Sugu would probably restrain himself. Now that he had gained a lot of favorable impressions, he thought it would be okay to joke about it. In fact, North Carolina was quite energetic. He smiled and said, actually, Washington asked me to come over. She asked us to sleep together at night. North Carolina will agree, it's useless not to agree. Ha ha ha, North Carolina, you can't escape my clutches. I'm used to sleeping alone, North Carolina said. Sugu said, before you met your admiral, you always thought it was good to sleep alone, but it's different now. In the past, Xiaozai liked to sleep in my arms the most, and she said my arms were the most comfortable. There is a saying that men and women should not be intimate with each other. Normal people don't have any male-female love for little Lolita, they only treat her like a younger sister. But since North Carolina said this, little Loli probably didn't care. While Sugu was confused, he didn't mind teasing him and said, "You actually understand this, I have a ring now, give it to North Carolina." "How's Carolina? You're just a young wife, so it doesn't matter." After Sugu just finished speaking, he immediately felt that he had patted someone on the head. He looked to the side and saw Guam retracting his hand. "It doesn't matter if you give me the ring," North Carolina said. For example, when Xiaozai first started, she didn't even understand the meaning of the ring. Sugu remembered that he didn't know much about men and women until he was in junior high school or high school. Besides, in this day and age, for many people, they only understand roughly before getting married that holding hands and kissing will not make you pregnant, and just sleeping together at night will not give birth to a baby. In the town hall, Sugu Boring would make garlands for the destroyers, and would also make rings out of grass and give them to the destroyers. The destroyer didn't know anything, and Sugu didn't care. It was almost like coming to North Carolina. Sugu said evilly, "I gave you the ring. Will North Carolina take a shower with me at night?" The royal sister's North Carolina has never been shy. She has a straightforward personality and speaks directly. She has a warrior-like personality rather than a coy eldest lady. Since that is his admiral, even though he has been missing for a long time, he is still an admiral whom he likes very much. "If you give me a ring, take it, and do whatever you want. It doesn't matter if you don't give me a ring." North Carolina said, "Okay." Sugu didn't think that much at all, he was still in the fun of teasing the little girl. At this time, he remembered what Guam had just said, about being more sensitive, and he said, "Girls' feet cannot be touched casually, and neither can their wings. If you touch my wings, you will be mine from now on, he he he. I've always been your ship girl." Sugu smiled and pinched North Carolina's cheeks and said, "Since you are my ship girl, why are you still showing a straight face to me? I've always been like this. Everyone says you are very energetic, and you are like a grown-up now." North Carolina sighed, "Admiral, I am an adult, I didn't want to say it." Washington finally tidied up the guest room and waited until she returned to the living room. She saw North Carolina holding a water glass and drinking water. Guam and Sugu were sitting on both sides, their heads lowered and being honest. "What's wrong with you?" Among the few people, South Dakota, who likes to cause trouble and seek death the most, is by his side, so the most active people are his admiral and Guam. The two of them are actually so quiet now. Akagi, who was sitting demurely next to him, had a funny expression on his face, while Richelieu was trying hard not to laugh. South Dakota couldn't see anything wrong. She finally escaped from Washington's hands and sat on Sugu's body. She hugged Sugu's arm like brown candy. South Dakota complained, "Washington keeps telling me to do things, violent woman." Sugu just nodded. North Carolina looked at Washington and said, "You have cleaned up so well, what are your plans for the evening? You and I can sleep tonight. South Dakota, Guam, and Richelieu can sleep in your room. Your bed is quite big. Since Akagi is the admiral's wedding ship now, let them sleep in the same room." As Washington spoke, he suddenly said, "You speak." North Carolina nodded and said, "Yeah, sister." Washington put his hand on his forehead and said, "What a big mistake. Looking for the lost ship girl." Author, Hai De Rong Yan. Chapter 431. Sugu had officially met North Carolina, although he seemed to be quite deceived during the meeting. Go to bed early at night, so that by the next day, Washington will have to deal with matters in his own office. After all, he was about to leave, and the firm still had many cases to deal with, so he couldn't just throw them away and ignore them. Although there is nothing to lose if you don't care, as a ship girl, I still don't want to do such an unscrupulous thing. The lawsuits that should be handled need to be handled in a timely manner, but it is too late, so they can only be handed over to other law firms. Fortunately, there are no lawsuits that take more time. The assistant helped for a long time, and Washington felt a little guilty for the other person. He was an intern in his own firm, but he didn't teach the other person much knowledge. Washington was unwilling to simply fire him and planned to introduce his assistant to a well-known law firm with which he was familiar. Nahee's assistant finally rejected her kindness, and instead of going to another law firm, he went to work as a legal practitioner in a company. Things in Washington require many days of busy work, and no one can help with matters in the office. Sugu takes everyone everywhere to play these days. As for Washington, he thought he would make it up to her later. North Carolina, she completely transformed into a Lolita North Carolina on the second day, both physically and mentally. How to confirm? In fact, there is no need to confirm at all, the difference is too big. Now lowly North Carolina will play in the living room, stick to your side, and happily watch you draw. She fights with Guam, she fights with South Dakota. These are performances that the original Lolita North Carolina would never have had. I don't know why everyone didn't notice anything was wrong. They probably thought North Carolina was angry because of his cold behavior. In fact, lowly North Carolina is not angry at all. When Sugu comes back, she will be happy and ask Sugu to hold her. She still likes to wear loose-fitting clothes, and of course, wear children's underwear when wearing such clothes. Now North Carolina doesn't feel like a cardinal. After all, the characters of birds are difficult to describe, except for parrots and crows. She comes across as a curious and active kitten. During this time in Jashka, Sugu took everyone to the forest park to see the tall trees and pine cones as big as a fist. Then we went to the amusement park and the zoo. In the zoo, Sugu introduced the honey badger to North Carolina. He said, "Society's flat-headed brother, people are cruel and don't talk much. There is a haunted house in Jashka with the theme of an abandoned hospital." After everyone enters, Sugu and Guam were a little scared. Lowly North Carolina was not afraid, she was just curious, so curious that she wanted to poke the bodies lying on the hospital beds. I don't know if those are real corpses or fake corpses, but they are probably fake corpses. Richelieu liked to stare coldly at the staff who acted as ghosts. She is not like a false knight in anime who is afraid of the dark or ghosts. She didn't feel any fear at all, and she even dared to check out those weird things. The head on that painting blinked. I touched it, but it just had a mechanism. Akagi is not afraid at the same time, her look even makes people feel helpless. Akagi, don't eat. Why? Even if you are not scared, you are eating bread and roasted corn all the way. At least give the staff some face. This is a haunted house. Akagi was not wearing a Maiko outfit, but an ordinary dress. The young and beautiful girl held the bread and looked at the blood-stained walls, the surgical tray full of bandages, and the bottles and jars filled with various organs soaked in formalin. She was still walking and eating in such an environment. She was probably the one who was most hurt by the staff. We have already been to parks, zoos, and amusement parks, and today we are going to the mall. Akagi put on this white beret, well, let's put on this hairpin. I suddenly thought about custom making a set of clothes like Akagi's, although you two look alike, you don't have Akagi at all. Long legs like Akagi's, big white legs and bare feet. Akagi never minded Sugu doing strange things. She was dignified in front of outsiders, but she was a vixen in private. Sugu also bought a lot of clothes for South Dakota, but Sugu would not accompany her when buying underwear. I have done some serious business these days, and Akagi has been transformed. In fact, the reason why Richelieu came here in the first place was to see if she could transform. It's just that for such a long time, Richelieu seemed to have forgotten this matter. Bring things up. Richelieu, you have forgotten how you grew up. Richelieu said bluntly, yes, I just want to go out with the Admiral, I forgot about other things. Facing the increasingly enthusiastic Richelieu, Sugu felt a little difficult to deal with. Until now, when he thought of Lexington's words, Richelieu was still quite romantic. Yes, it is indeed romantic, passionate, and sultry type. Although she looks like a knight on the outside, when you peel off her appearance, she is full of fiery passion. This time, only Sugu and Richelieu came out. After all, they were not out to play. The two of them were standing on the embankment by the sea. The battleship Richelieu in the Old World was once renovated at the New York Navy Yard, but now I don't know which city in the Old World Gasca is. After all, the world has changed a lot. There is a shipyard here in Gasca, which mainly produces passenger ships and cargo ships. The shipyard is large, but it is definitely not the New York Navy Yard related to Richelieu. As time has passed, the New York Navy Yard in the Old World has probably become a ruin somewhere, or it has sunk into the sea. Wanting to find or confirm, Sugu obviously couldn't remember the longitude and latitude lines of various cities in the world before, and maybe the longitude and latitude lines were different. Sugu said, I heard that there are ruins of cities under the sea. Let's take a boat and go diving. Don't want. The idea of diving was blocked. After all, the ship girl had difficulty moving in the water and there was no submarine around her. Sugu said, the Old World can probably only be found through ruins. Richelieu said, I don't know what the reason for Akagi's growth is now. Is it because of past memories or because of overcoming the haze in my heart? The battleship Richelieu has not experienced anything important. The only time it was affected was if there is a betrayal. Where can we find the deep-sea fleet led by the deep-sea Hood? Remember that the Hood and Richelieu did not have a head-to-head confrontation, and only the deep-sea Hood is not enough. As for finding the ruins of the New York Navy Yard in the Old World, the Admiral thinks it is possible. Sugu said, it's probably difficult, but Richelieu must be under pressure. After all, Akagi has grown and is now bigger than before. Sugu looked at Richelieu's gentle expression and thought, Richelieu is not his wedding ship. In the game, because she joined in the late stage, he already has many powerful battleships, and has been unable to obtain them. Attention! Richelieu is not a girl with a fantasy. The fantasy element needs to be replenished at any time, but Sugu never replenishes the Richelieu element. The character she usually displays is not like Saratoga or Bazai, where she naturally stays by your side and has never done anything close to her before. Kent is weak. If he doesn't take good care of her, she can be bored all day long without the big tiger by her side. If she doesn't take the initiative to bring the fruit to her, she will never go to the warehouse to get it. Although sometimes Leipzig seems a bit grande, in fact she will not really do anything harsh on anyone. It's just that her thin lips and cold face make it difficult to speak. Richelieu was strong, had many friends, and had many people to rely on. She usually has a lot of entertainment. She will take the initiative to find books to read, or she will draw with a drawing board in the governor's mansion. She didn't need extra care, so Sugu cared less about her. Regarding the renovation, I initially considered Akagi and not Richelieu at all. Think about it, apart from Akagi, the only ship girl in the garrison who has reached full level and has not been transformed is Richelieu. When Richelieu found him with his notebook, although he felt that the possibility of Richelieu's transformation was quite unreliable, he immediately decided to let Richelieu accompany him. At that time, he thought that Richelieu might be under pressure. The two walked side by side on the embankment, and the sea breeze blew over. Richelieu leaned on the rusty metal guardrail. The sea breeze blew her long golden hair up, and she ran her fingers through it. Richelieu said, "I felt a lot of pressure when I first saw Princeton. Everyone became stronger. There's actually no pressure now. Don't blame me. The Admiral used to give people the impression that he was a lustful person. Don't deny it. Well, that doesn't seem to be the point. You used to give people the impression that power was more important than anything else. The people you married were all they are very powerful battleships. They are both big ships and big guns, and everyone thinks you like big ships and big guns. As a ship girl, it is very simple to like the Admiral. For everyone, it is not that the battleship is not under great pressure. For our battleship, if we are not liked, we suspect that it is due to lack of strength. If we want to become stronger, we should not wait for it. In the Tutelary Mansion, I can bring victory to the Tutelary Mansion, and I think this will probably make the Admiral like me. I had very little feeling for the Admiral before. We have been together for such a long time, and now I have gotten to know the Admiral again. The past impression has disappeared. The Admiral now is definitely a gentle person, and will not treat anyone differently because of who is strong and who is weak. So, there is no pressure whether you grow or not." Sugu listened to Richelieu's words and thought, "Is this a confession?" Richelieu continued, "You always talk about knights, Knight Richelieu. I don't think I am a knight, just Richelieu, a very ordinary Richelieu. But knights are knights, and the Admiral likes knights." Sugu said, "It's just so. It doesn't matter if you like it or not." To be honest, Sugu still likes knights, but only because of his desire to conquer. Richelieu was walking with her hands behind her back, then suddenly turned around and walked backwards. She said, "Why don't the Admiral make me a knight? Then I will be a real knight." Sugu thought to himself, "I really have no feelings for knights, I just like beautiful older sisters wearing armor. That process is very cumbersome and impossible to do. And it's strange, why do you have such an idea? The sudden thought can be regarded as willful, just try the simple process. The Admiral will tap my shoulder a few times with his sword and it will be completed. It feels like playing house. We are the Admiral and the ship's wife, not the Lord and the Knight." Richelieu said, "Let's have fun." Since Richelieu insisted, Sugu would not refuse, and he also found it a bit interesting. He took the command knife handed over by Richelieu and lightly patted Richelieu's shoulder twice. After doing such an action, I thought, I should just say something casually at this time, such as stating the basic principles of knights. I don't know those things at all. Richelieu didn't care so much. She felt the command knife tap her twice on the shoulder, raised her hand and said, "I will swear allegiance to the Admiral to the death, I will." Sugu said, "As for the Knight Richelieu, you should call me Lord. If you call yourself a maid, she always calls me master." Richelieu pursed his lips and said, "Let's call him Admiral." Sugu smiled and didn't care. He looked around, wondering if anyone had noticed it. It was best not. It feels a little embarrassing to do such a thing. Richelieu had already stood up from the ground. She looked at Sugu's side face and thought, growth doesn't matter at all, well, it's a lifetime thing. It doesn't matter what the ring is, at least there's no rush now. When I returned to the apartment that night, the affairs of the Washington office had been sorted out, and everyone was talking about leaving.